Hello and welcome to the Epic Fantasy Book Club Hobbit podcast. We need a shorter name for this. I'm Joe. Here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And it's time for the Daily Shill. We need you to subscribe and share the video as we're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. And then we're going to publish the first chapter of a dark fantasy horror novel for you. That out of the way.
Subscribe.
Precious wants you to. Precious wants you to. Let me just find the page. Oh man. On the first page of the of chapter 6, we get the joyful news that they've made it out of the Misty Mountains. Now, I personally found that the previous part was good, but I just wanted them to get to the Lonely Mountain. But that said, we do get some interesting characterization in the on page 107 of my edition. It goes without saying I'm always running it by the edition I have in hand. Gandalf seems positively afraid for Bilbo and so attached that he refuses to actually continue the quest without Bilbo. And he's even willing to dive back into the Misty Mountains to go and save him, which could end in Gandalf's own death. But he's dang nabbit, he doesn't want his friend to die. That said, Balin is puzzled by Bilbo's sudden appearance, and Bilbo deliberately doesn't say anything about the ring on page 109. That said, Gandalf's a little puzzled by this and gives him a funny little look. Which is hinting at what's to come in the next book. Where Gandalf over the years figures out which ring it is. Now, that said, Bilbo's the only wielder, it seems, of the One Ring to have ever wielded it for good, to an extent. Frodo did end up using it, but more under the compulsion of the ring. I'm not going to judge it as good or evil there. Whereas everyone else has wielded it generally for evil, Bilbo tried to use it more to help friends, stop wars. So while it had a negative influence on him, he did use it in a good way. Although I imagine Sauron's ring was vomiting in his mouth if it had one at the very thought. Anyways, now that said, we also get the gang picking up strawberries and sorrel on page 113, which that's pretty funny. Because, they need to eat. Sorrels represent joy and good-heartedness, while strawberries symbolize spring, rebirth, as well as righteousness and love. Now, I imagine it when looking it up. I imagine when you think of love, most of you will think of the romantic love. One has to bear in mind platonic love was something that Tolkien felt was a very important virtue and something that people oftentimes overlooked. And in his generation, it was often idealized almost more than romantic love. You couldn't always count on your spouse, but you could always count on your best friends, your best mates, your brothers, your sisters. Now, that said, with that in mind, there's a lot of positive symbolism to draw there. And now for the thyme, sage, and marjoram, and bracken and pine roots symbolism. Yeah, we're going to go deep into that because, somebody kind of has to. Now, thyme symbolizes courage, according to the ancient Greeks, which that's interesting. Sage symbolizes wisdom and immortality.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think everyone guessed. Now, marjoram is where we run into our first hurdle here. It symbolizes, now, happiness is good, but bridal love or sexual love. This is where our idea of symbolism here is just shot out the window. We're going to keep going. Now that said, Bracken Grant seems to represent perpetual youth, as well as invisibility, which that symbolism is interesting because Bilbo's ring, or Sauron's ring, we should say. As to pine, it represents fertility, wisdom, longevity, and it's a symbol of peace. Now, symbols aside, the gang ends up reuniting, only to end up having to flee up several trees because, well, how do I put it? They have wargs after them. Now, the wargs seem to be large wolves that the orcs ride upon, with the orcs of Tolkien's lore being about man-sized. So they do tower quite a bit over dwarves and hobbits, seeming to be almost giants in their eyes. Now, that said, the goblins end up coming up with a good plan. When Gandalf tries to put some of the wolves on fire with his magic, the goblins take some of the fire, light some branches and grass and whatnot, and start to consolidate the fire near and under the trees upon which the gang has kind of climbed up, thus trapping them. And this is where chapter 6 leaves off with the eagles starting to come in. Now, on page 132, we find out that in later days, the Eagle Lord will become Eagle King, which I wonder where that... I just wonder about where that plays in with Thorondor and whatnot. Probably Thorondor is the High King, as he's basically the avatar of Manwë, while this King Eagle is just a lesser sub-king under him. Sub-Regulus. Now, that said, the Eagles end up saving the gang in chapter, either at the end of chapter 6 or beginning of chapter 7. Let me just scroll through. End of chapter 6. So, from there, they end up making their way to Beorn's house. They play a little trick on him by introducing the dwarves 2 at a time. Except for Bomber, who's so fat they placed him last. But he doesn't like going last, so he just shows up right after the other 2. Before him, because he's impatient by nature.
Bomber was annoyed.
Yeah, well, it's his fault for being so fat. I'm just saying, dude's enjoying the healthy life a little too much. Now, as to... Let me see if I could find the actual pages where... Because I didn't make in my note... I didn't note this time the order of the dwarves. Normally I would, but I didn't this time. Oh, well. What's most important is that we get a Radagast mention. Now, Gandalf calls him his cousin. They're not exactly cousins. They're both fellow Maiar who decided to incarnate themselves into the mortal realm in order to fulfill the duty of hunting down Sauron and helping mortals along. But Radagast quickly fell in love with nature and animals and decided to basically become more of a druid. Whereas Gandalf fell in love more with sentient mortals and is basically helping guide them as a Merlin figure. But the two are very close friends and co-workers.
Yeah, which is probably why they call each other cousin.
Yes, because in Shakespearean times, it actually meant best friend. So if we look at it that way, Gandalf's pretty much saying Radagast is his best friend. And that, although if you take the modern term, I guess you could kind of argue or say that they're distantly related. And this is where it's very clear that Tolkien was working towards certain ideas. He was still developing Radagast in a way, and was developing his ideas of the Istari, or wizards. With that said, let me see if I could once again try. This time I want to try finding Bomber. Oh, right. Biffer and Bofer showed up, and Bomber came puffing up behind them. He was angry at being left till last. He refused to wait 5 minutes and followed immediately after the other two. He's going to get into more trouble again like this. Remember over the boat? And that's in chapter 8, I think. Needless to say, Bomber ends up testing the patience of his companions a few times. Now, I'm fond of him, but I'm fond of all the dwarves. But Bomber does test the patience of his traveling companions several times in the journey. Beorn and Gandalf do end up leaving the heroes off with a stern warning not to tread off the beaten path of Mirkwood, which they probably should have heeded their advice, but they ended up later listening to Bomber. This is piss poor advice. I'm just saying.
Bomber tends to whine a lot.
Yeah, well, Bilbo's not that different. Except Bomber's fat and wants to eat all the time. And he's basically, I don't know how to say it in English, but le chat patapouf. And, yeah, he's going to get them into trouble. Thankfully, Bilbo's there to get them out of trouble. But it's interesting that on page 160, you get Thorin who reassures Bilbo saying, "Don't you worry, it'll get lighter all too soon over the miles we're going to have to travel. Before long, I expect we shall wish our packs heavier when the food begins to run short." And it's also interesting that I think it's Thorin who ends up, I'm just reading here a little. Yep. All right. Well, Thorin ends up offering comfort to Bilbo and reassuring him, which is the first real generous moment he has towards the Mr. Baggins.
And in a way, Bilbo's becoming a bit of an honorary dwarf.
Yeah, in this crew's eyes. They originally started off, they didn't really think much of him. Well, who could blame them? But at this point, they've started to think highly of him. In chapter 8, it's when they're going to start thinking very highly of him.
Because he's starting to pull his own weight.
Yeah, and starting to pull everyone else's weight along, too. What do you think of chapter 6 and 7? Honestly, chapter 7 almost felt like a prelude to another story. Like, to the next adventure.
Because I'm liking that the chapters are, like, set up in a form of short story.
Somewhat. Some of them, yes. Some of them, no.
And...
Because, like, chapters 6 and 7 seem to just be lead up into the next arc.
Yes, and I'm liking...
Well, chapter 6 is technically concluding the Misty Mountains arc.
And I'm liking that we're getting more involved in the personalities of the dwarves.
Yeah, yeah.
Like Bomber and Thorin.
Thorin always had a personality, but Balin is really going to be the one that starts getting characterized. Then there's, I think it was Nori, and no, it's Dory. Dory, you've got Dory and Bomber and Balin who are getting a lot of characterization. Dory's always the one carrying Bilbo, and he actually is the one who has to go all the way back down to grab Bilbo and rescue him from the wargs. And while he does it in a complaining mood, he does risk his own neck to save Bilbo. So Dory's obviously got a lot of guts. Fili and Kili are the youngest, although Fili is complimented for having great eyes. A lot of the dwarves seem to think that he's got the best eyes, but it seems to be Balin. Although, as we find out in chapter 8, which will be for the next video, and we'll be getting in more detail in that next video. And the thing is, Bilbo has probably some of the best eyes as well. Now, we're going to cut this a little shorter because, well, we want to make these episodes more manageable. And there's really not as much to report on this time. Beorn's an interesting shapeshifter, although I wouldn't exactly want to run into him, so to speak. He seems as wild and as uncontrollable as nature itself.
I'd say you wouldn't want to meet him in a dark alley, but
Or a dark forest.
that'd be more apt. And I'm liking that we're getting more into the character development of the individuals in these chapters.
Yeah, and Gandalf has to run off to go deal with the Necromancer. Alongside, I think, the rest of the White Council. They end up finally mounting their attack on Sauron after Saruman's been manipulating them to putting it off for, I think, a century or two. I'll have to freshen up on my Middle-earth lore.
And now Bilbo and the dwarves, training wheels are off.
Yep. And they face plant in grand style next time. Oh, man. What'd you think of these two? Just as they are. They weren't as gripping as the
they're not
previous chapter.
No. But you know what? I'm prepared. I like this preparation for the next real arc a lot better than the earlier preparation and lead up to
Entering the Misty Mountains?
Exactly.
I actually preferred that one. I didn't much care about this one. I have to admit, I got a little bored towards the end of the Beorn chapter. I love the mention to Radagast. I love the little trick Gandalf plays on Beorn, but I still found it towards the end a little dull.
That's fine.
That said, the next arc is not going to be as exciting as I find the Misty Mountains to have been.
Yeah.
I really like the Clash of Golem. Although that said, I do like how dealing with the Wild Elves and Thranduil and how Bilbo has to outfox the elves, and boy, is it kind of easy for him. The elves here are not the Noldor. They're not the elves of Doriath in a way. They're their descendants, but boy, have these elves kind of gotten less sharp over the centuries. But that said, they are no less amusing. I still love these elves, but I'm just saying they're very paranoid about outsiders, and boy, are they... well, once you read the Silmarillion, Dan, you'll understand why they're a little paranoid. It's because, well, for one thing, Thingol screwed up, their greatest king, and so did, I think it was his descendant. No, it was, yes, it was his descendant. I forget his name, but he messed up even more when he denied the Feanorians the Silmaril. But that said, the Feanorians left their freaking mark on the Wild Elves. So them being mistrustful of outsiders and hiding from the world is fairly reasonable. Although, what's funny is that Thranduil ended up raising his son and heir in a very sheltered manner. So freaking sheltered that at quite a few points, Legolas is going to come off very naive and even innocent. Almost Sakura Avalon level innocent at a few points, where he really has no idea of the inner workings of the outside world. And he does come off like an easily amused elf, like the other elves do, but at the same time, throughout his centuries, he's never really experienced life as other mortals have. So Legolas is a very interesting character. And a lot of what we see in The Hobbit comes into play in his character in the next couple of novels. Although Legolas is one of the best characters because of his bromance with one of the dwarves.
Mm-hmm.
So
it'll be exciting to see.
Yeah. Although we'll be moving backwards towards the Silmarillion instead. We're going to be moving from this book to the prequel because we might as well at some point. I'm hoping to do it that way instead, and then when we go to read Lord of the Rings, we'll catch all the mentions and references to Hobbit and Silmarillion.
That's a good idea.
But for now, we're going to just stick to our Hobbit book club. The Silmarillion book club is months, if not a year away or something. For now, we're sticking to our Hobbit book club. Next time, we're going to do chapters 8 to 9 as the escape. You know what? No, let's do a chapter 8 to 10. Making our way to the Dale. Like, getting completely out of the Mirkwood, Elfland-ish area. So, next time we have to discuss the clash with the spiders, elves, and just escaping the wild elves. The green elves, as Tolkien called them. So, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, comment what your favorite part of this part of the book. And don't forget to share the video and subscribe if you haven't already. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers so we could publish for you the first chapter of a dark fantasy horror novel we're working on.
Subscribe.
You're trying to just ingrain it in their minds subconsciously.
Yes.
Okay. Keep doing so. Anyways, take care. And until next time, many happy returns. And I just realized as I was saying that makes no sense for a departure. Anyways, until next time, may the power protect you all. And so, may Eru Iluvatar.